Okay, hello. Welcome to the live stream for November 7th, 2018. I am your host, Dana Morningstar, and this is a live stream that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you are new here, welcome. If you are returning here, welcome. And let's see, Hooray is here. Hello, Karen. Hooray, welcome, welcome. Did you guys have a good Halloween? Did anybody do anything fun? I'm sorry I wasn't here last week. I totally forgot to announce that, and then time just slipped away from me. I went up north to Traverse, well, I guess somewhat up north to Traverse City with some friends. We do that once a year. We have a friends retreat. We rent an Airbnb and have 3 or 4 days where we just hang out. So it was good. Karen says she checked out Alanis Morissette's Conversations on YouTube and it was amazing. I know, right? Like I totally agree with you. Her channel is amazing. That was just a shock. I just did not expect her to have a YouTube channel, I guess, for starters, or for it to be so insightful and amazing as it is. So I'm glad that she's doing that. So Benjamin is here, Blue Moon, Rom Cam, Grace, Marie, Surf Smurf. Hello, hello. Oh, that's cool. Dora went to New York. She says it checked off my bucket list. Very cool. Was it everything that you were hoping it would be? I've never been to New York, so I only have stereotypes in my mind as far as what it would actually be like. Sam, Elusive, Lioness. Oh, hello. That's quite the name. Shelly, San. Hello, hello. Oh, before I forget, book club is the last Thursday of the month. I figured this would be a good time. Let me give you the right date. November 29th. So November 29th, 2018, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to be discussing the book, The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion by Christopher Germer. This is the book. So I will be curious to see what everybody thinks about it. It's very in-depth. I've only just begun to get into it, and I'm very impressed so far. So I'll be curious to know what you guys think. Oh, thank you, Grace, for the live stream donation. I appreciate that. Oh, Missouri Cowboy says, I drove around and witnessed people who take poor, sweet, defenseless pumpkins and ruthlessly slaughter them, ripping out their guts and seeds, and then they displayed their blatant taste for mutilation. Maybe you can start a new thing out in Missouri where you just have people carve sweet potatoes. That would actually be pretty cute. And then at the end, you guys could do a sweet potato roast and have a French fry party. Let's see. Dora says, oh my gosh, best vacation I've ever had. Wow. Very cool. So did you do all of the usual like New York kind of sightseeing stuff, or what made it the best vacation ever? And I guess, are you a big city person? Last Miranda asks, Dana, have you ever had writer's block and how did you overcome it? I used to have writer's block often, and what helps me overcome it is outlining more. And I think changing my understanding of how doing drafts differently. So the old me used to feel like I had to use every single word that I wrote. And so I would really stress myself out with like writing a really clean draft. Like I was basically trying to write a final draft, and changing that mindset to viewing it and this came from somebody in my writers group. They said, basically view it as you're just shoveling sand. Like you're just trying to get words on the page because you can't edit what's not on the page. And so then that really took the pressure off. I'm like, okay, this is just basically a brain dump of everything that I'm thinking about this topic. Then I can go back and clean it up. So doing that has helped tremendously. Or oftentimes, I guess actually, I'll set a timer and then I'll do writing sprints. So I'll write for 15 to 20 minutes and I'll just push myself to go, go, go. And that helps to just shut off like the critical part of my brain and just to write as fast as I can, as much as I can, and just get those words down. So yeah, it's a challenge. I think every writer faces it at one point or another, but a lot of times it's just from all the pressure that we put on ourselves. Oh, Evelyn says, hey, Dana, my little dog just had puppies. And the only thing that settled her with all the fireworks was when I put your video on. So a big thank you from our tiny family in Scotland. Oh, how that's makes my heart smile. That's so cute. What a amazing thing. And how fun with all the puppies. So thank you for letting me know that. Dora says she went and saw the Cher show on Broadway. Oh, that sounds fun. Tanitria says, hello, everyone. What are we talking about? I'm just joining. Well, Tanitria, so far we've talked about Dora's best vacation ever, which was to New York, and Missouri Cowboys' intense dislike of pumpkin carving, and how he might start a new movement in Missouri where he carves sweet potatoes. And what else were we talking about? Oh, writer's block. We've covered a lot of very varied ground in a short amount of time here. Oh, Grace says, yes, my kitties usually gather round when we're listening here as well. That's so funny. That's so cute. I wish my kitties would gather around. They're part wild. Actually, they might be full wild cats. They're actually pretty domesticated for what they are. But they're so sweet. But they're not exactly the real well, I shouldn't say that they're not snuggly. They're not necessarily snuggly with me. They're super snuggly with Travis. So, okay, let's see. Oh, how fun. Dora says she went to the Brooklyn Bridge. They went to the Bronx. They went to Little Italy, walked the Brooklyn Bridge, rode a horse and buggy in Central Park. Oh, that does sound like an amazing vacation. Nicole, switching gears, says, I've been listening to you and others for 2+ years. I thought I was prepared and I still went back. I don't know why. Well, it's worth doing some kind of soul searching to figure that out. Odds are we tend to go back when, well, everybody's different, obviously, but sometimes there's some sort of need that we're not getting met in our life that we feel like they're able to give us. So maybe it's a sense of connection. Maybe maybe you're lonely. Maybe it was, if you were experiencing a lot of that love bombing, it might've been like a lot of, just that attention and affection. I don't know, but it's worth doing some soul searching for. I think once you have the answer to that, then you won't go back. So if you can figure out what needs that relationship was meeting for you, even though it might've been meeting it in like a toxic way, if you can figure out what needs it was meeting for you and then work towards meeting those needs in more constructive ways outside of that relationship, then odds are that pull towards them greatly diminishes. Last Miranda, I'm not going to read your question out loud because I don't want to start YouTube drama, but I think the exact same as you. So, actually, let's talk about that. I think maybe YouTube and maybe the internet in general I think it's really important for people to understand, because there was some YouTube, I don't want to say drama, that makes it sound more superficial or like mild than I think than it is. But there was some issues a few weeks ago with some other YouTubers that were involved that are in the kind of the narcissistic abuse community, and people were really upset, and they're like, oh, this person they're an abuser, and they're kind of masquerading as a victim, and they're a coach, and you've really got to watch out for these people, and this, that, and the other. And I think it's important to realize that this is the internet, and anybody can say anything, and they can pretend to be anything. And just because somebody says that they like this, just because they might even be a life coach or a therapist, or they might claim to be any number of things. It doesn't mean that they're not abusive, and it doesn't mean that they're even being honest. So it's kind of the whole buyers beware thing. Like, I would really proceed with caution and kind of hold on to what helps and let the rest go. So it's just important that we have healthy boundaries at all times, especially I think in these types of communities, like narcissistic abuse type communities, because these do tend to attract a lot of vulnerable people that are easy to exploit. And so, the problematic people of the world catch on to that. And it's unfortunate, but, just be aware of that. Okay, let's see here. I'm scrolling up. And Karen is talking about going back and some tips for that, and talks about abuse amnesia, and had mentioned, she says, take Dana's previous suggestions of writing down the list of why you need to stay away. That definitely helps. So if you're tempted to go back, and part of it's abuse amnesia and part of it's denial on our end. It takes a while for hope of things being different to die. It takes a while for us to really see the situation clearly and to fully realize, like, this is not working. Like, this is like, I can't do this anymore. And so it helps to be able to kind of snap ourselves out of that, and that list of writing down in like bullet point format of every single thing that's all of the reasons as to why you're leaving or you need to stay gone, and rereading that if you're feeling that pull towards going back. It really should help snap you out of it. Okay, let's see, let me. Rob asks, do you have moderators on this live stream? Yes, let's see who's here tonight. Right now, I only see Missouri Cowboy, but we normally have a few hop on. Is there a problem? Is there a problem that we need to be aware of? If there is, let us know. Okay, let's see here. Okay, scrolling up. So what's going on this week? Is there anything in particular that you guys would like to talk about? I'll share some update news with you guys. Our house, we had the house fire back in May 2nd, I believe it was. And we're still here in the apartment waiting for the house to get done. So it's been just like one delay after another for a while now. It's supposed to be completed in like 8 weeks. And I mean, it's been months. So the new date that we're supposed to be in by is November 30th. We will see. They still have a ton of stuff to do, but the latest delay is the ceiling in the kitchen. They had to rip out all of the drywall on the ceiling. Well, then when they opened that up, they found that the support beams through there, somebody, I cannot believe anybody would think this is ever a good idea. Like, I don't even understand like what the thought process was, but there's structural like support beams. They drilled holes through them and ran pipes. So there's plumbing that runs through all of the support beams in there. So of course that's not safe and it's not up to code. So they're having to somehow like redo all of that in the kitchen. And I don't know how long that'll take. But hopefully we'll be out of here November 30th. It's just been so draining to be in this apartment, and because everything here is temporary. I should take pictures. It's boxes. We have so many boxes. My office, I'm looking at this. There's probably 30 boxes of stuff in here. It's like working out of a storeroom. There's boxes in every single closet. There's our living room. We have this like foam futon thing on the ground. It's not comfortable, and it's really difficult to get up off of because it's only like 6 inches high. And we have boxes for like feet rest. We have boxes for side tables. The cat house is a box. There's just boxes everywhere. And because we didn't want to buy a bunch of stuff and then have to move it again. So Travis and I both are like, oh, just please be done by November 30th or even December 30th. Like, just give us a light at the end of the tunnel, but like, please, no more delays. So we'll see. Marie asks, she says, I wanted to ask, how do you guys feel more whole or real? I feel like I am more non-existent now. My relationship gave me existence. It's a bit strange to say. Does anyone else feel the same? Well, I think that kind of what you're describing is, I think in large part, it's definitely a sign of some majorly blurred boundaries. And this is a pattern that I had really run in my life too, although I hadn't realized it probably until I read that Facing Codependence book by Pia Mellody, and she talks about blurred boundaries. But I think for a lot of us, it's very common to really lose ourselves in a relationship. And like there's an old joke out there that's something along the lines of like, when a codependent person is dying, they see somebody else's life flash before their eyes, because we make other people our primary focus. Like, there is no sense of self. Like, we're getting our sense of self from our relationships, from our friendships, because there's just no sense of true like individuality and like boundaries there. So it's difficult when you've merged so completely with a relationship or another person to rediscover, like, who am I in all of this? And then I think another really big takeaway is, after you kind of figure out, okay, who am I, to hold on to that, not from a place of fear of like getting hurt, but from a place of like self-preservation of like, this is an autonomy of like, this is who I am. And I want to be able to bring like my whole self into a relationship instead of kind of being this empty vessel. Or what was that book? I think it was one of the books that we read had described when we don't have boundaries, we're like a jellyfish in a jar. Like, we continually just take the shape of whatever vessel we're in. And that's a problem. So redefining yourself, getting back in tune with like your likes and your dislikes and what's nourishing for you and what's draining for you, and getting a solid sense of self, because it really takes, for a healthy relationship, we need to really bring that solid sense of self to every relationship that we're in order for us to have kind of that authentic presence there and an authentic experience within that relationship. So Missouri Cowboy asks, are the boxes labeled? I have no idea why I have boxes with no labels. No, most of the boxes are stuff from Amazon that Travis has ordered. I will tell you, I have created a monster with Travis. We started watching these design shows, and I forget what is that show? It's with Chuck and Joanna Gaines. Um, I'm drawing a total blank. It's such a cute show. They're such a cute couple. Design show on HGTV. We were watching that. I don't even like that was pretty much the only thing to do in the hotel. We were just because we were stuck there because we had cats and they were traumatized and we felt bad leaving. So we were just kind of hunkered in that hotel room for like the first week or so. And Fixer Upper, that was the name of the show, Fixer Upper. So we were watching like ridiculous amounts of Fixer Upper. And at first Travis was like, oh God, this show again. Like, I don't want to watch this. And then he got really into it. And so anyways, he has been designing stuff on IKEA and like buying stuff on Amazon and thinking about how things are going to coordinate. And it's kind of become this running joke because he's really good. He's really, really good at coordinating stuff. So people always joke, like when we were going around picking out, because they basically gutted the whole house. I mean, took off, I don't know, a good chunk of the drywall. They ripped up the floor, all of the cabinets, the bathtub, the counters, like the bathtub, everything's gone. Like that house is totally gutted. So we had to start over, and people kept saying like, oh, like that I'm the one because I'm the woman, right? They're like, oh, well, she's just going to choose everything and that he didn't need to choose anything. And I was like, no, you guys have this all wrong. Like, he is the one. He knows exactly what he wants. And he's got a fantastic taste. So it'll be fun to see it come together. Sherry says, my mom loves that show. It seriously is such a good show. Grace says, yes, you totally have to label these boxes. I know. And I have, gosh, it's going to be quite the experience moving back in because there's still so much more that we have to buy. I think I told you guys about 2 months ago, maybe, because they kept telling us, oh, your guys are going to be in like 3 or 4 weeks. And so we've been putting off buying stuff because we're like, well, we don't want to buy it and then have to move it. And then one day I had this freak out moment because we only had one glass. Like, I don't even know what we were thinking. I think we were just in like survival mode. We only bought one drinking glass and we had just this random hodgepodge of silverware and like hodgepodge of towels that people, like right after the fire, people were like, okay, you're going to need some of this stuff because it takes a while for the insurance. They have to reimburse you for all of that. And we had to buy nothing. We had to buy everything. And so none of the stuff was matching and, which is, don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely radically, outrageously thankful and grateful that people were either donating stuff to us or letting us borrow stuff. But it just felt very unsettled, not having, it just felt like we were very in transition. And so, yeah, like we had one glass. I'm like, this has to end. Like I need another glass, like just 2. If I can just have 2 drinking glasses, I'll be fine. Just something to rotate out when it's dirty. Ah, gosh. Okay, let's get back to it. Jessica says, talking about boundaries here. And says, I think I'm missing part of it, but she says something about setting boundaries, but how can I, when everyone around me tells me that everything I think, feel, want, and need is wrong, and that I'm selfish for making myself a priority? And it's as if I don't have the right to exist or set boundaries, and when I do, they get trampled on. So this is one of the biggest challenges with setting boundaries with people that have been in our lives for any length of time, because they're used to us. There's kind of this dance that 2 people tend to do. It's oftentimes not intentional or even a conscious thing. We just get used, and we're the same way with other people as they are with us. There's just kind of this comfort with, okay, this is how they are. This is how we interact. there's just this level of comfort with this. This is just the dynamic between us. And so when a person starts setting boundaries, that shakes everything up and it really freaks other people out, especially if they're really used to you saying yes all the time. And then when you start saying no, even if you're saying no uh, in tactful, loving, respectful ways, it might really take them aback. I had a very similar thing when I had my last job. Um, like I got along really well with the vast majority of my coworkers, and it had gotten to the point where we had a fairly, from time to, well, I shouldn't say time to time because it was more often than not, but we would have kind of these immediate things that would come up for our clients. Like so and so needs a med refill right now, or so and so, and this would happen. Crisis don't wait, right? So it might happen during lunch. It might happen, 20 minutes before we would open, or it might happen at the end of the day. And so when these things happened, we had to address them. But it had gotten to the point where there just were very blurred boundaries where people, and all of us were guilty of it, where it was sort of like, well, I have an emergency and I need somebody else to help with this right away. And then there was really no respect for lunchtime or for the end of the day stuff and this kind of stuff. And when I began saying no, and I shutting my door during lunch and just saying, okay, guys, this is going to have to wait. Like, this is just going to have to wait. And somebody else's, this has been going on for months now or for weeks now, like an extra hour, unless of course it's a major thing where somebody's like really in crisis. Unless something is extreme, I will get to it after lunch, or even the expectation of us working through lunch. And because I worked with a lot of, everybody that I worked with was either a nurse or a social worker. And so you had a lot of like kind of caregiving people. We all had really blurred boundaries, and we all tended to put our clients' needs ahead of our own. And so when I began setting boundaries like that, I feel like there were quite a few coworkers that I had that felt like that felt mean, or they felt bad, like they'd really overstepped the line. And it took a little while, and it was really uncomfortable. And I really had to fight the urge to not give in and just be like, oh, well, I'll just do it really quick or whatever. But I would say, you know what, you guys, I've really got to start guarding my time. I care about you. I care about these clients so incredibly much. But for my mental health, I need some time to decompress and to just shut out the world, and I'll be back soon, And it was amazing because after that awkward phase, like that adjustment period settled down, then things ran so much smoother. And then other people began doing it too. Because then we were all being authentic. And then other people were like, you know what, actually, I think I'm going to do that. Like, I think I'm going to turn my phone off during lunch. This stuff can wait. If it can't wait, then it can go to somebody else, And it made for a much more pleasant working environment because then resentments weren't building up. So like in your personal life, saying no, asserting yourself, even if you're doing it tactfully, it can be really uncomfortable for other people around you. And it can be really difficult to kind of hold your ground and just say, this isn't working for me, or I'm not comfortable doing that, or just even not giving an answer right away. Like this kind of stuff, like it really does take practice. But if you are truly around a bunch of other people that really act as though you don't have the right, to exist, or that you don't have the right to set boundaries, and they get really upset with you, then I think it's time to start kind of expanding your circles and meeting some new people. And I think that's another big kind of wake up call for a lot of us, is like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people in our lives that our dynamic is non-existent if we start saying no, or if we start setting limits. And that's really a painful realization. But if you can start kind of meeting some new people, and then you're implementing these boundaries with new people, then there really isn't this adjustment period, because that's all they know. That's all they're like, oh, that's just how Jessica is, right? Like, oh, these are her boundaries, and they're okay with it because that's all they've ever known. So there is no kind of awkward adjustment period there. That adds definitely a different challenge, Jessica. She says, well, how do I do this when this person is my mother and she has custody of my daughter? So, oh, okay. So I would try to communicate kind of, I don't know, what is the dynamic with your mother? And like, I guess that would be where I would start. Like, what is the dynamic with your mother? Like, are you guys on some decent terms? Is she resentful that she's having to raise your daughter? Because if that's the case, then I think, and if you guys have a decent relationship, to really see about kind of getting some boundaries in place. And I don't know if I don't know the custody or the visitation or what all is possible there, but you know, sometimes communication can work wonders in that. I guess it just depends on like what she's wanting you to do or not do, and how long is she going to have custody for? Like, is this indefinitely? Kind of what are some of her expectations that you do or not do? Okay, she's not resentful of having to raise her. Okay. Can you give some examples, if you're comfortable, about like what she's kind of got some issues with as far as you setting boundaries? And I guess, do you live under the roof with her as well? Like, what I'm trying to feel out the dynamic here. That's a great question. Connected 72 says, how do you feel less lonely the more enlightened you are? So many people don't want to work on themselves and just want to complain and suck your energy. So I guess as far as enlightenment, if we're talking like self-awareness and like practicing boundaries and kind of really working on ourselves and our mental health and these kinds of things, I think a big part of it is you just start meeting people that are more like you, and not engaging in conversations that just really suck you dry. So either changing the topic, or just excusing yourself, or kind of figuring out like your own limits for that kind of thing. And I will tell you, one of the most freeing things is just to realize like they are where they are, and to not feel the need to try to change them. Like that just takes so much pressure off of like, okay, they're gonna vent, or they're whatever it is, like whatever they've got going on, like that's their stuff, and I don't need to make it my stuff, and I don't need to try to fix their stuff. And there's many other ways that I can kind of handle this. So it might be limiting the time you spend around them. Like I said, it might be kind of excusing yourself, going and doing something else, trying to change the conversation to something in a nice, like in a tactful kind of way, to something that maybe some common ground that you both have, that they would enjoy talking about, these kinds of things. I encountered this again, like a lot at work. And this is like in small ways, where people would continually complain about the weather. It was just kind of little like normal small talk kind of stuff that people would complain about. They'd complain about, oh, it's a Monday, or, oh, I'm so glad it's a Friday, or, oh, it's snowing, or, complaining about other coworkers. And like, my goodness, it's just stuff just drags you down. And there were certain people, I changed the way that I walked through the office, because I just didn't want to engage in these kind of conversations, even though I think half the time they didn't even really mean it. It was just the small talk that people say, like, how are you doing? Oh, it's a Monday, that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh gosh, get me out of here. So, like getting to work a little bit early and just kind of avoiding certain conversations or excusing yourself from certain conversations is huge. Okay, let's see. Gray Rock says, yes, once you start setting boundaries, the next one gets easier. It does. And there does come a point, even though it might still be challenging to set boundaries and you're like, oh, this is just really awkward. And, you know, there's some battles you have to kind of pick and choose. Hold on. Phew. Phew. Excuse me. There's some battles that you might have to pick and choose. But there does come a point, like each boundary that you successfully set, you're just guarding, you're valuing the peace that you have in your life. And once you get used to having peace in your life and all of those like little mini resentments don't happen because they're not building up, because you're able to figure out ways of just either avoiding them or successfully dealing with them as they come up. The more peace you have in your life, the more you just don't want to ever compromise that. It's sort of like, oh my gosh. And it makes it so much easier to continue setting boundaries and to just not tolerate like major dysfunction. And then it just becomes something that you just do. It's just a part of who you are. You don't have to think about it. At first, it can be really complicated. It's kind of like learning to drive a stick shift. Like there's a lot of things you've got to figure out, like how you shift gears, and then you've got the gas and the brake and the clutch and like all of these things going on. But like once you get the hang of it, you don't even think about it. Like it's totally effortless. And sometimes it's even kind of fun. And setting boundaries is the same way. Like it just becomes better with practice, I guess is what I'm saying. Okay, let's see. Here, let me scroll down. Vaughn asks, what do you do if the other parent enables the abuse going on in the house? Well, I think if you're of the age where you can move out, I would just try to get out of the house. Like we can only control what we can control, and we can't control other people. And so trying to get the other person that allows the abuse to continue to change is like screaming into the wind. Like they've got their own dance going on. And like, you know, all we have control over is ourselves and like how we respond to that. And I guess, and if you're not of the age where you can move out, then it would be trying to carve out as much peace as you possibly can in your life. So I would say just steer clear, to stay busy and steer clear from as much dysfunction as you can. And you'll know, like when you've reached that place, when you start having a reasonable idea, like at a minimum, a reasonable degree of peace in your life. So, and even if you can just carve out a few hours at a time, like you can go to bed earlier, you can possibly take up another hobby that gets you out of the house. At night, you can potentially, like there's a bunch of YouTube videos that are guided meditations, putting in your earbuds and listening to those and just decompressing, like really making your self-care and your mental health and your inner peace a priority as much as possible if you're just in a situation that you're not able to escape from. Let's see. Let me scroll up here. Question Jessica asks is, what do you do when a narcissist in your life says that you're a narcissist? it goes back to like what we have control over. I mean, that's such a common thing. Like narcissists, when a person does try to set boundaries, when they do have needs and wants, if they don't get their way, then they feel like they're being manipulated and abused. So it's really common for them to say that you're being a narcissist because it's all about you. And it's like, well, no, it's not all about me. Right? Like I have needs and wants and boundaries and things like that. But I think it goes back to picking and choosing your battles. Like I wouldn't even engage because they're not, whatever you say isn't going to change their mind. So I just wouldn't even engage in that conversation. Let's Be Real said, why do they say NPD is rare? Narcissism certainly isn't rare. Well, I would agree with you. I think they're talking more about, well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that percentage. I think, I don't know, odds are like, I don't know, right around 4% of the population is estimated to have narcissistic personality disorder. I think that percentage is low because narcissists don't go to therapy, for starters. So how are they going to actually measure any of that? And then I think how it's viewed is often very, very skewed. I think there's a huge misunderstanding by the mental health community. And Dr. Robert Hare, he's the kind of the leading guy in expert, I guess would be a better term, in the field of psychopathy. So working or understanding psychopaths. And is always often talking about this, his frustration with this stuff. It's weird. Like a mental health clinician can be trained in and is trained in personality disorders, but how the different criteria for like NPD or antisocial personality disorder, how it's understood, there's like a lot that's lost there. So to kind of list out certain characteristics of like, oh, this person's grandiose, they're, for narcissists, they're grandiose, they're very self-serving, they're highly manipulative, they have a lack of empathy, they have a lack of remorse, like these kinds of things. It's hard to kind of see some of that stuff in motion, especially if you're not on the receiving end of it. And, how people present when they're in prison or when they go to a therapist is very different than how they are when they're in full swing with their target. So I think it's misdiagnosed because a clinician can only diagnose what they see in front of them. And if a person, especially with antisocials, they're oftentimes very charming, they're very convincing, they have a reasonable degree of emotional maturity. So they realize when they're coming across as being difficult or demanding or unreasonable or ridiculous, whereas most narcissists don't have that level of introspection. So it can be really difficult to kind of see through that superficial charm. So, and as far as narcissism goes, so like the more clinical definition of it, it's pervasive, persistent, problematic behavior. And there's a series of criteria for it. But, like the grandiosity, like everything that I just mentioned. So in everyday life, and it's on a spectrum. So, I think the ones that are really like kind of the textbook narcissists, it's only one way that narcissism tends to come across, like that arrogance, that grandiosity, that entitlement mentality can come across in a wide variety of ways. Like not all narcissists are like overt narcissists. And some of the covert ones, don't always come across like textbook narcissists or what people think that narcissists look like. And I guess, or act like, and I guess that's another point is we all have ideas of what a problematic person looks like and how they behave. And when we encounter, and mental health clinicians as well. And so when you encounter a person, or mental health workers in general, but like when you encounter a person that doesn't fit this idea of what you think a problematic person looks like or acts like, it's really hard to kind of fit that diagnosis. It's even hard, if you think about it, it's even hard for like a physical diagnosis of like cancer. Like there's certain, you would think like stuff like that would be a slam dunk. It's kind of black or white kind of a thing, and it's not. So a person can have all of these different symptoms, and depending on like the doctor's training, depending on like the different tests that are run, depending on just kind of their experience with alternative presentations of like certain diseases or disorders, they might not catch it. That's really, really common for people to be misdiagnosed physically with stuff like cancer or heart attacks or diabetes even. I mean, so personality disorders is a lot more challenging because it's not, there's no real like diagnostic criteria. I mean, you're basically going based off of observation of their behavior and kind of a checklist that you have in your mind. So there is, versus like a physical test where you've got blood work, you've got, like all kinds of different, more like quantitative measures that you can take to see what's going on with the person. But yeah, I agree. I think a problem, even if it's not a clinical type of narcissism, a problematic degree of narcissism is huge. I feel like that is such a problem in society. I think dysfunction in general, because this stuff's not taught. This stuff's not taught in general. So even the people of the world out there that like, have never grown up in dysfunctional homes or even been around dysfunctional people, it's a problem if they haven't been educated as far as like what problematic behavior is and how to respond to it and how to deal with it. So, because odds are they will eventually come across some sort of problematic person. And this stuff is not taught with the degree or the frequency or the depth that it needs to be. Okay, let's see. Yes, and I agree. Let's Be Real says, remember, narcissists are on that reptilian brainstem. They were trained to fight the world since childhood. It's that me, ego explosion. Yes, I agree. And I think that's that basic survival mode. Here, this is wild. Like, this is kind of a far out theory, and I might have mentioned this before, but every now and again, I'll just start kind of going down these different rabbit holes. Like, you just think kind of random thoughts. And so this is, just bear with me. But like, if you ever think about the Bible, okay, like the creation story of like, kind of how humans are born, basically we're born into original sin, right? And I was thinking a while back, like, let's just look at this as a metaphor. Like, what if human beings are born into a sin? But what if the writers of the Bible were talking more about sin being, well, if you think about like the 7 deadly sins, right? Like lust, gluttony, sloth, greed, these kinds of things. These are like basic, kind of what you're saying, like primitive ego states. So if we're all born in, to me, that makes so much more sense. Like if we're all born into like this quote unquote original sin, meaning like this primitive ego state. And that one of the ways that we can transcend that, if you, again, like just like, I don't have some sort of like a Christian agenda here. I'm just saying, if you just look at these different stories as kind of more Bible stories as more like metaphor. And then the way that people transcend that is in the Bible, it's basically through the grace of God, right? It's through the forgiveness of God. But a big part of that is actually finding God. But a big part of actually truly finding God and finding that belief in God is you have to humble yourself. You have to put that ego state aside and tap into kind of like what God wants for a person's life. So to me, like understanding it more in terms of like ego, and you've got to humble yourself in order to kind of self-actualize. To me, that makes a lot more sense than that humans are born bad. Like, I don't think humans are born bad, but I think we're all born into a really underdeveloped ego state that hopefully we can transcend out of. That was way off track. So I hope that makes sense. Oh gosh. Okay, let me scroll up here. But I also think, like, what actually, real quick, let's go back to that. But what you were talking about, let's be real, about that primitive ego state, like that reptilian, like brainstem kind of ego state, like self-actualization can't happen at that level. Like, that only happens at these because we basically have three brains, right? We have one brain, but it's really in three main parts that have evolved over time. So you have that reptilian brain, and then you have the emotional brain, or like the limbic system. And then you have the what we would consider the human brain, like that prefrontal cortex. And it's only when all three of those three types of our brain, or three different brains, get in sync with each other, that's when we can start actually self-actualizing. But if a person's just living in one part of their brain, then they're missing out on like giant chunks of information and how to process it and how to interact with the world and how to understand themselves and all kinds of stuff. Okay, let's see. Let's Be Real says, I think my narcissist dad may have sexually abused me, but I don't remember my childhood much. Here's kind of my take on this. And it's just been my experience. I know that people talk a lot about like repressed memories and that they just don't remember certain things. And I think there's it's just been my experience. And that every person that's been through something traumatic, it's like a flashbulb goes off in your brain, and it kind of locks what happened into your brain. I think, if anything, people struggle their whole life to try to forget what happened to them. It's concerning when they're like, man, this person was so problematic. Like, I feel like something had to have happened. The concern I have with that is that I think it can be really easy to kind of get some implanted false memories. And, if you don't remember anything that happened, I don't know if I would, this might sound terrible. I don't know if I would spend a lot of time trying to remember, because you might not remember correctly. You might, and if you don't remember, sometimes that's a blessing in and of itself. So I don't know. That might sound really messed up, but Interested says, when should I contact a professional? I'm having trouble concentrating. Anxiety is manifesting as trembling hands and rapid heartbeat. I can usually control it, but not lately. Well, I would say it's time. And there's some things that you can do, like starting now, to help kind of relieve that anxiety. So I would highly recommend, if you drink caffeine at all, cut out the caffeine. If you drink coffee, switch to decaf. If you drink caffeinated tea, switch to some sort of tea that's decaffeinated. If you drink pop, like caffeine free, or water. Getting rid of caffeine, I can't even express to you what a tremendous difference it can make if you're already feeling that kind of this hyper aroused state. It's such a game changer, just doing that one thing. Even if you're like, well, it's never really been an issue. I only have 1 or 2 cups of coffee in the morning. When you're already in that hyper aroused state, even 1 cup of caffeine can send a person into panic attacks. So that might be something that you could try starting immediately. Catherine says, why caffeine? Well, it's a stimulant and it's a drug. So you can overdose on caffeine. And a lot of us, especially if I don't know how it is in Canada, but at least here in the United States, we drink a ton of caffeine. I mean, my goodness, like you look at this is my cup, this is my mug, right? This is my coffee mug, my tea mug, my anything hot mug. This is this is a big mug. This is easily 16 to 20 ounces. So this is not one cup of coffee. This is like two and a half. And so our portion size for things can be really skewed. If you're going through a drive-through or Starbucks and you're getting a coffee and it's a big one and it's, 24 ounces, you know, a, a cup of coffee is 8 ounces. It's like those little tiny styrofoam cups. Like that's a cup of coffee. So if you're having something that's like a lot, grande, something or other, that's 4 or 5 servings of caffeine. And so if you're doing that throughout the day, like, yeah, it's a lot. And that's a great point. CFIN says, and cyclical hormones can heighten your sensitivity to caffeine as well. Let's be real. Just talking about panic attacks and stuff, another thing that you might want to consider, and to the person too that was saying, like, when should I seek help? Another thing that you can do on you, like I said, on YouTube, there's 2 of my favorite people that do guided meditations are Michael Seeley and Jason Stevenson. And so carving out time to allow yourself to wind down at the end of the day, to decompress. They have tons of videos on like releasing anxiety, getting a good night's sleep. Sometimes it's not just one thing that we need to do. It's a series of things. Journaling sometimes helps to just dump all of everything that's kind of circling in your brain onto paper. That can help with anxiety. Making sure to spend time with friends, supportive people, and doing something fun, that can make a huge difference. Even if something fun is, watching funny YouTube videos or watching a funny movie, things like this, getting your brain to switch gears into something that's more positive and something that's lighter can also really help. Chamomile tea, that's a good one, Felicia. Yeah, a nice cup of tea, a good book, a hot bath, Epsom salt bath can really help. Magnesium, like magnesium flakes in a bathtub, can be really soothing for muscle relaxation. Yeah, that's a great. JJ says, light a candle and breathe deeply and slowly. Meditate down to just listening to your breath. Every time you start to think of anything, stop that thought and refocus on your breath only. Yeah, a lot of places too have like community yoga classes that are free. So if money is a concern, going to some free yoga classes, for guys out there, it's a great place to meet women. Lots of women love guys that are interested in, like, enlightenment kind of stuff, yoga stuff, kind of spirituality. Probably another good, well, I guess it's a good place to meet people in general. Interested says that they got the Egyptian licorice tea that I recommend, and they said it's really good and it's caffeine free also. I did not realize that it was caffeine free. I'll have to read but yes, I know, I love this tea. I love this. This was like one of my top finds of 2018 was this tea. Let me just brag about this tea for a second. If you've ever been to an Aveda salon, the tea that they have there it seriously tastes like that tea. And if you buy it at Aveda, it's super expensive. And I was just not willing to spend that kind of money on tea. So I used to go to Aveda and get my hair cut and colored. I swear they would lose money on me because I would drink so much tea. They were probably very happy to see me go, like, after I would get my hair done. And then I found this Egyptian licorice tea. You can get it at the grocery store or on Amazon. It's the yogi tea. It's like $5 a box. And I agree. I think it's just a great blend. And I should also add, I'm not a licorice person. So it doesn't even taste like licorice. It's just that perfect amount of sweetness. Sassy little Frassy says, appreciation post for the tea. Yes. Let's see. Let me scroll up here. That is a good question. Alice Wonderland says, what is sleep harassment? I'm guessing what that term refers to, so correct me if I'm wrong here, is when a person is trying to sleep and you've got an abusive person who won't let them sleep. So either they're continuing to they're picking a fight right before bed, or they wake you up wanting to fight or wanting to talk, or being really loud. They're just kind of, they're harassing you while you're trying to sleep. It can even be physical, where they might kick you really hard or even punch you or hit you while you're sleeping and then pretend like they didn't mean to do it, like that they were sound asleep or that they didn't see you there, this kind of thing. Sleep, if we're talking about the same thing, like that kind of sleep harassment tends to be something that is an ongoing thing. So if anybody's wondering, like, well, how do I know if somebody really, if they really didn't mean to kick me in the middle of the night, or if they had a bad dream, like, it comes across as really bizarre behavior. Like, what on earth? And like, or you can kind of tell, like, they're pretending to be asleep, but they're not, or that they're engaging. You just get the feeling like this person's trying to keep me awake. Like, I'm just exhausted and I need to, they know that I have a big day tomorrow, or they know that I have to work, and they're not letting this go, or they're picking a fight this is dumb. Like, I'm so over it. And this isn't something that, like, it doesn't make sense. And it comes across as strange, and that they're trying to keep you up. Yeah. Truth Seeker says, yep, ongoing. And Truth Seeker says, yes, also 1:30 in the morning, throwing things on the floor over your head at random intervals. Let's Be Real says, basically, could narcissistic abuse create psychopathy? It's unlikely, but what are your thoughts, Dana? Well, I think it depends. It depends. Okay, so the concept of psychopathy, depending on who you're talking to. So it's understood, I think, by more of like the professionals that are more into like the neuroscience part of it. I could be wrong. So if there's any professionals out there, please correct me. I think those that are really trying to understand like more of the brain science behind it, they might say that psychopathy is more of a brain disorder, like that this person just brain chemistry wise really lacks the ability of like empathy and impulse control and kind of certain motor functions. Like they're very, they don't lack them completely, but they're definitely lowered compared to like a quote unquote normal brain. But if you're talking about blending the term of like sociopathy and psychopathy, like antisocial personality disorder, which is kind of like an umbrella term. So that kind of stuff, most personality disorders are generally thought to be more of a combination of nature and nurture. So, and I think more so nurture than anything else, because it tends to be more of like attachment disorder kind of stuff. So if a person's gone through, if they just didn't bond effectively to their caregiver for whatever reason, if they encountered some significant trauma, especially at a young age, and a significant trauma doesn't have to be like what we might consider significant trauma. Like it doesn't need to be like a child that grows up in a like a Romanian or Russian orphanage. that maybe wasn't able to be held for the first year of their life. Like that's traumatic, right? But it doesn't even have to be that extreme. It doesn't have to be like a child that's lived in Rwanda and has grown up in like this war-torn country where they, all they've known is like fear and, this kind of really scary environment. It can be people process trauma in a wide variety of ways. And like what registers as, this is kind of where like the nature part comes in. Like what registers as traumatic to one person might not another. So like you might have one person who's, I don't know, like maybe, I don't know, let's say whose parents divorce, for example, and they become like profoundly impacted by that. Whereas another child, it might not negatively impact them all that much. Or do you have two different children that get bullied, and one child, again, like profoundly impacted by it. The other child has hurt feelings and they don't like going to school, but they don't internalize it. So that's the hard thing. So I think a lot of times with sociopaths, like there has been like some pretty significant childhood trauma that's occurred. It's the nature. Somebody had said a while back, one of the live streams, that it's like nature, nurture. Nature loads the gun, nurture pulls the trigger. And I think that's very, very true. And because a lot of this stuff, like coping mechanisms and processing pain of any kind, this stuff isn't taught, then I think it can be kind of a crapshoot with how people start dealing with things. And so with that, those like sociopathic tendencies in if you've got basically, children at a fairly young age that have gone through any type of kind of trauma, and if that behavior is not able to be corrected at an early age, they just continue with it. So it's, and like we were talking about earlier, a lot of this stuff is just considered normal now. I mean, my goodness, I have a friend of mine who does substitute teaching, and like the stories she comes home with, it's just outrageous to me that kids would ever think to talk to an adult like that. I would have never thought to talk to an adult or act the way that kids nowadays act. And it's amazing to me, just the level of entitlement and just lack of respect that's so prevalent. So. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. Yeah, it's a fine line. JJ was saying, yes, mothers who spare the rod and spoil the child, that's a problem too. So like, it's kind of these two extremes. I think Pia Melody summed it up perfectly, where she really talks about dysfunctional homes, not in terms of abuse, or even like extreme home environments, but she talks about it in like, what does she say? Less than nurturing environment. And I think that's so accurate, because like it can be, if a child is spoiled, they can literally just be spoiled rotten, where they have this huge sense of entitlement. And that spills over into adulthood, where they just feel like that the world owes them one, and it doesn't. Or the opposite, like if a child just grows up in a really where none of their needs or wants are met, then they can become really angry and start lashing out, and they have this axe to grind, and they kind of want to they have this like scorch the earth mentality. And people can develop that scorch the earth kind of mentality in any number of ways. They might have felt the need, or not even felt the need. They might have, due to culture, due to generational things, if let's say they were gay, and that just wasn't culturally acceptable, or that wasn't acceptable in the home they grew up in, or what have you. And so and if they started getting angry with that, like anger has to go somewhere. It either tends to go outside of us, or it's either internal or external. We internalize it in a wide variety of ways, and we tend to lash out in a wide variety of ways, because again, this stuff's not taught. Like healthy coping mechanisms, for how to handle frustration and anger and, you know, just all of it. All of it's just really not taught at the level that it needs to be. And I think most people tend to grow up with having certain wants and needs that are not met in their home environment. And then as an adult, they're continually trying to work all of this stuff out and figure out kind of, why is my life not working? And what do I need to do? Like, what do I need to do now in order to get it to work? Crystal is talking about a video about crying narcissists and says, I always knew it was for himself. Anyone else? Yes. The two in my life, Jack was the first one. I had never seen an adult fake cry before. And that was the most wild thing I think to that point, I'd ever seen. Because I couldn't believe that he was doing that. And I couldn't believe that he thought I would buy that. Like, it was ridiculous. It was the mentality of a little kid, like, yeah, I can tell you're fake crying, so just stop. It was so strange, so strange. When he also did cry for other things, but knowing what I know now, it was all a show. Like, he cried there was one time, and I've mentioned this before, where we were watching, he'd never seen the movie The Deer Hunter, which is about Vietnam. It's a fantastic movie. And we got about, 30 minutes or so into it, and he turned it off, and he's just sobbing like a child. And I'm sitting here holding him, and he had told me that, he had been in the military in Germany, and he starts telling me like all of these horror stories about the deaths, that people that he'd killed, and all of this stuff. And this didn't register as that odd to me because my ex-husband was also in the military and had been in several war zones. So we lived in a military community. Like, it just didn't sound as strange as it might sound to other people. And then I later find out he was never even in the military. So like, all of that was just this huge show just to see what he could get me to believe. Weird. And then Steve saw him cry twice. And again, it was strange. One time he'd cried, who I thought was his ex-wife, but it turned out to be his wife. She had an adult daughter who he'd only ever known as an adult. She was in her late 20s, I think. And Steve never liked her. She was a drug addict. She was, had just caused a lot of anger and conflict in their family. And anyways, she had suddenly died of a drug overdose, and he was like beside himself and was sobbing and like took the day off work and all of this. And I remember at the time thinking like, this is an extreme reaction to, I can understand being upset about somebody dying, but you didn't like her. You never bonded to her. It was weird. And it felt like he was putting on a performance at that time. Then again, like when he upped and left, if I remember correctly, I think there was some crying then too. But again, it was just insincere. Like that was the common theme between them. It was just insincere. Yeah, so strange. Well, okay, so Let's Be Real says, you could put me in a room of potential girlfriends and I would probably be attracted to the most narcissistic ones. That's why I have to keep my eyes peeled, see the warning signs, the facial expressions, and love myself before having a relationship. I would say the loving yourself before you have a relationship one is key. So it can be exhausting to try to read body language and facial expressions and to figure all this out. Odds are there's a hook, that there's something that's drawing you towards these women. And most of the time, I think for a lot of us that are drawn to these kinds of really intense personalities, it's that intensity that hooks us. And I think female narcissists tend to really lead with their sexuality. So it can really pull men in because they can really seem like, oh my gosh, she's kind of so special, unique, and different. I feel this magnetic attraction to her because she's really putting on a performance. And it's oftentimes very attention seeking and, just that constant need for like admiration and validation. So if like, and I've talked about this before, like, so I'll give you an example, like my hook. So once I realized, because I had a handful of really problematic people in my life, what I didn't realize it. I realized that they were problematic, but I didn't realize that there was a pattern between the kinds of people that I had in my life. And it took me getting involved with two sociopathic men to start connecting the dots. But even then, it took me like a handful of years after that to really see that there was a pattern there. The common ground was my emotional wound was that I had been walking around feeling very unloved and unimportant my whole life. And so when somebody, male or female, so like friend or potential partner, when they came in and they were very quick to make me their whole world and give me a lot of attention and affection. And they create this whirlwind of like, oh, I'm basically I'm your new best friend. And you're everything I've ever wanted. I was misinterpreting that. And so I was like, oh man, this feels so right. I feel like I've met my new best friend. I feel like I've met a soulmate, and I wanted to, and I willingly would jump into that whirlwind and fed it. So they would want to talk to me for hours. I would want to talk to them for hours too, plus some. They would want to spend as much time with me as I could. I'd want to stay even longer. So they were feeding a starving person, basically. And once I realized like that was the repeating theme, and that helped me to really slow that down and to start understanding like that love bombing, that idealization, to see it as the insincere acts that it actually is. And so I guess for you, if you can kind of figure out, okay, what is the reoccurring theme here? And it might help for you to write down like the difference, because odds are it's not just in one area of your life. There's probably been problematic coworkers, probably been problematic friendships that you've had. So maybe make a list of 5 to 10 problematic people that you've had in your life, and maybe even in your inner circle. And to go through and like examine, how did these relationships or friendships start picking up steam? Like, what was the common ground? Did you feel this like immediate connection to this other person? Were they like kind of what were some repeating themes there? With women, were you guys hopping into bed right away? Was it like the sexual attraction? Was it she was really building up your ego and like telling you everything that you'd want to hear? Kind of what was it? Because once you can figure out what it is, then you can work to disable a lot of this kind of manipulative behavior in the future. And once you do start loving yourself, a big part of loving yourself is valuing your energy, valuing your emotions, valuing your time, and slowing things down. So when you are meeting somebody new, realizing that you might feel like that they're this amazing person, and they might actually be an amazing person, but you don't know because you don't know them yet. So realizing that all of these initial feelings that we have towards another person, they're based more on the fantasy and these assumptions that we have about who this person is. They're not based on reality. So we have to just go slow and kind of just pay attention to how things are going, and just continue to set boundaries along the way. That's a game changer. Like really loving yourself enough to walk away from what doesn't nourish you, and loving yourself enough to, if there's problematic stuff that comes up, loving yourself enough to address it, because you're valuing peace in your life, you're valuing your energy, you're valuing your emotions. But I can totally relate about like the being attracted to the most problematic people in the room. I had gotten to a point where if anybody was even attracted to me, and this was kind of an ongoing joke I would have with friends, that if a guy was attracted to me, I would almost want to tell the guy, like, I'm really sorry to let you know that you have a personality disorder because I only attract men that have personality disorders, because that's how it felt. I'm like, man, I had a lot of relationships that were really good when I was younger, but I swear after I got divorced, it's just been like one after another of like really problematic men. And this kind of stuff just was, I don't know. There's a wide variety of reasons for that, but I think I was more emotionally starved out after my divorce. I was more in a fear-based attitude of scarcity kind of mindset as far as like trying to find somebody. And I didn't know how to love myself or my time or my energy or any of that. I didn't know what it meant to have boundaries. I didn't know what it meant to pay attention to my instincts about situations. I didn't know like a lot of things. So I don't know. Take what you can from that, and hopefully you can use something. Let's be real says, I see everyone as a narcissist, even though that's bad to think like that. Well, and maybe you can back that up a little bit. I think it's kind of having just neutral, right? Like, I don't know. Sort of like in healthcare, we have this thing called universal precautions. So when we come into contact with body fluid, there's precautions that are in place. Like you wear gloves, you clean up in a certain way, you put it in a certain bag, you throw it away in a certain garbage can. We don't know if those body fluids are contaminated or not, but it doesn't matter. Like we just have this procedure of like, this is just, these precautions apply universally to all fluids, right? And it's kind of the same thing with, this is, I think, a healthier way of interacting with people. It's kind of having these universal precautions of, I don't know if this person is toxic or not. And it doesn't really matter, because what works for me is to just kind of be neutral about it. But I have these precautions in place where I set the pace, and, like I value my energy. I value my time. I don't spend hours upon hours talking to strangers before I meet them. If I was dating, I'm dating Travis, but like if I was in the dating game again, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't spend all of this time before meeting a new person. I wouldn't be in a huge rush to move things along. I would realize like, I don't know this person. And so it's great that I'm feeling this connection that we have, but I'm still going to go at a pace that's comfortable, because that's the responsible thing to do. So shifting that. But I will tell you, the rest of the world, because the people, like, this stuff's not taught, the rest of the world doesn't interact with people like that. I think the more common mindset is treating people, taking for people at face value, giving full and complete trust right away, and only adjusting if a person breaks that trust. And I think that's dysfunctional, but it flies under the radar of like, no, this is healthy. This is what love is. This is what, you got to love like you've never been hurt before. And it's stupid. That's just terrible advice. And reckless. Like it's just reckless. Like we don't approach anything else in our life like that. Like you would never go into business with somebody, right? Like you wouldn't take them at face value. You wouldn't move quick. Like there's just no, oh my God, like there's just no value in that. Everything is easy to get into. It's so much harder to get out of. And I think really grounded, functional people understand that. And it's cool. Like when you take the pressure off of needing to know, of trying to like interpret all the signs and like, are there red flags? And I don't know. And maybe so. And is it me? Is it them? I'm hypervigilant. I don't know. Like getting rid of all that and just kind of realizing like time will tell, like time will tell. I'm going to keep going at a pace that I'm comfortable going. And even if I want, let me make a caveat there. Even if I wanted to go at a really fast pace, I know that that's just not a good thing to do. Like I just need to go at a pace that feels healthy, and to have, the thing is, it's much easier to keep a healthy pace if you're not making this other person your whole life. Like if you have hobbies, if you have friends, if you're, if a relationship is just the candles on the cake, it's not the whole cake, right? It's so much easier to go slow because you're not starved out. And I think it truly does take a lot of maturity to slow down, because that idealized phase is a part of every relationship, and in the beginning, like the sex and the connection tends to really be there, and it's a bliss, and you've never met anybody else like this before, and this is this amazing person, and that's due to all of like the dopamine and the oxytocin and all of this chemical cocktail that's going off in your brain when you meet a new person that you really have chemistry with. But time will tell if that's real or if it's just based on that initial chemistry. And so, just slowing it down and realizing, like, I feel like I'm connected to this person, but time will tell. And I'm just going to keep paying attention to their behavior. If things feel a little off, I'm going to distance myself to a point that, or I'm going to address it. And I might distance myself to a point that feels healthy and reasonable, or I might completely leave, like whatever you feel the situation calls for. And once you can get to the place where you can, that you're in charge, like you set the pace, this is your life, that you don't have to get dragged through hell by these relationships, like you can leave. Like, then it takes so much of the pressure off of you needing to understand or figure this other person out completely, like right away. It just takes all of that pressure off. And it's like they're going to be who they are. Time will tell. And then you're going to respond appropriately. And like having faith in yourself that you can respond appropriately it's huge. Okay. So let me scroll up here. I guess I'm confused by the question, Kiara. She says, Dana, help. Is it possible to be intimate with someone who you wouldn't want to be close with, but you have established that your relationship is purely friendship with benefits? I guess I'm confused by how you're using the word intimate, because to me that's synonymous with being close with somebody. So no, it's not. Are we using the word intimate as like a euphemism for sex? Like, is it possible to have sex with somebody that you wouldn't want to be close with? Because to me, intimacy is that's something that's a later stage. It comes with trust that's earned, with consistent, appropriate behavior over consistent behavior over like a decent amount of time. There's that level of trust there where they feel like an emotionally safe person. They feel like an emotionally safe person because they've proven themselves to be. So you're able to risk being slowly becoming vulnerable around them, sharing deep parts of yourself, whether those are emotional parts of yourself or physical parts of yourself. So like that's how I understand the intimacy. If we're talking about a friendship with benefits, then to me there really is no intimacy there. Like it's whatever the friendship was plus the benefits, right? And whether or not, and then I guess if the friendship is there and the benefits are there, and you're wanting to see if you can be intimate with that person, then isn't that a relationship, or kind of like the foundational parts of a relationship? Yes, I agree. Missouri Cowboy saying sex is one form of intimacy. Like one can be intimate with a friend with no sex. And he says safe person. Yes, I agree. Like intimacy involves that emotional vulnerability of allowing another person to see us for what we really are. Our the most sensitive parts of ourselves, our wants, our needs, our hopes, our fears, our dreams, sharing past hurts, letting people into your inner world is intimacy. And yes, whether or not platonic or sexual or however, however that kind of goes. Okay, let's see here. Con P says, Dana, I've been 10 weeks, no contact as of today. However, it seems like I'm numbing out where self-care and healing are concerned. Advice. Are you feeling depressed? Like, have you struggled with self-care before this point, or is this a recent thing? And I guess another thing to think about is what have you tried for self-care? Sometimes I think it can really help self-care wise to really kind of get a routine. So you might have telling yourself, okay, on the weekends, or if you work a 9 to 5 during the week, like on the weekends, okay, I'm going to, depending on how much, obviously, like how much of a struggle your self-care is, like, okay, I'm going to shower before 10 a.m. or I'm going to make sure to do something fun on both Saturday and Sunday, or I'm going to call a friend, like doing things to really nourish yourself, making time for that, making that a priority in small ways on a regular basis, but kind of getting a schedule for that can help. If you are struggling with depression, it can really be easy for time to fly by and you do not realize, like, oh my gosh, I haven't left, I'm not leaving the house, or I'm not showering, or I'm not spending time with friends, and I'm not doing things that nourish me. And that can go on for weeks, months, years without a person really realizing it. Okay, Conpi says, yeah, depressed. I've tried meditations, affirmations, grounding. I'm starting to have trouble getting out of bed. Well, I think there's definitely a time and place for kind of medical interventions. And, and it sounds like this is one of them. So if you're really struggling with some depression, sometimes getting on the right medication, even if it's for, a handful of months, can really help. So it might be worth a doctor's visit to do that. I'm trying to think of some, like, here's the thing. I know people, every time I mention like going to the doctor and like antidepressants and stuff, that tends to get kind of mixed responses from people. And some people are like, well, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to get on medication. I want to do this naturally. If that's where you're at, that's fine. But I would just really strongly encourage you to get clear with yourself of, okay, if you're going to try to do this without medical help, if you're really in a big depression, get clear with yourself as far as like how long, like what are you going to try? And how long are you going to try it doing this like the natural way before you take the next step and actually get medical help? I say this because I've struggled with depression on and off my whole life. And it's really easy to lose like years of your life thinking that you just don't want to you don't want to be on medication. You don't agree with it. You want to do things naturally. But then the depression is keeping you from like doing things. Like if you're struggling to get out of bed, it's really hard to develop a self-care routine, right? Like we intuitively know, like, okay, I know I'd feel a lot better if I went for a jog around the block or called a friend or ate healthier food, ate cleaner, did these kinds of things. But if you're to a point where you're pretty severely depressed, where you just don't have the drive, the motivation, or the stamina to do those things, then continuing to tell yourself like, yeah, I'm going to do these things, I'm going to handle it, and it's not getting handled, there needs to come a point where it's like, okay, I need to do something different because I'm just, I'm not being honest with myself about how bad this is and my ability to handle it. So now it's time to do other things. And so that might mean, and I'm not saying that it necessarily even has to mean getting on antidepressants, but doing something different. That might mean hypnosis, that might mean, EFT therapy, the tapping therapy. It might mean like whatever you feel comfortable with, but getting clear of like what is the plan going to be. Okay. Con P says, yeah, I agree, Dana. I think I'm at the medical intervention step. Well, and that's a good realization to have, you know. I when I had severe depression for years, and I remember, and I go through that, and you would think as a former psychiatric nurse that I would know better and do different. And it's really hard to see this stuff when it's us. And I finally, I don't even know what made me do it. I finally dragged myself into a nurse practitioner's office, psychiatric nurse practitioner's office. And she asked me, she's like, are you depressed? And I was like, I don't know. And so we did this depression inventory, and she's like, you're severely depressed. How long has this been going on for? How long have you felt this way? And no, she's like, have you felt this way for more than 2 weeks? And I started laughing. I'm like, are you kidding? I felt this way for years. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I deal with this every single day. And I wasn't able to identify it within myself. When I got on Wellbutrin, and of course, every medication is different for different people, but that did the trick for me. And I noticed, and I don't know if it was psychosomatic or not, but really within that first week, I noticed a marked improvement in my mental health. And it made me want to cry, because it was like, oh my God, it had been so long that life didn't feel like such an uphill climb for everything, for getting out of bed, for doing stuff. Like it just was a game changer for me. So, there's no shame in doing what you need to do in order to get your mental health on track. Okay, good. Con P says, I'm seeing a doctor on Monday. Okay, that's fantastic. That's excellent self-care. Excellent, excellent self-care. So something else I would encourage you to do is, because it can be really easy to think, because the change, it's like sometimes depression can be like a gradual decrease in our mental health. And sometimes when we start coming out of it, it can be a gradual increase. And so it can be really hard to tell if the funk we were in was like situational or hormonal, or if we're really like that much better, because it's amazing how quickly how we feel can become a new normal. So it might be worth, I would just encourage you to do this, to write down how you're feeling, to start charting it on like a regular basis for like, if you can do it every day for the next month, that would be really helpful. So like on a scale of like 0 to 10, maybe, and it depends on you, like your level of whatever symptoms that you're having, if it's sadness or if it's numbness or if it's feeling hopeless or kind of lethargic, like lack of energy, rating that on 0 to 10, like how severe is this? Because that way, a month from now, if you do end up getting on an antidepressant, you can go back and see in this journal, like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize, I thought I was feeling a little different, but now some certain things I'm feeling are not even a thing. But boy, 3 weeks ago, they were like at an 8, like they were pretty severe. So you can chart your mental health progress. Oh yeah, good for you. Sherry says, I have bipolar disorder. Medication is so necessary. I feel like I can make my own decisions now. Yes, absolutely, especially for bipolar. And it's just, man, I tell you, when I was a psychiatric nurse, it was one of the most rewarding parts of that job was seeing people coming in that were either bipolar or schizophrenic, and they would get on medication, and maybe they'd been misdiagnosed or just untreated for years. And they would come in a certain way and you'd see them a few months later and it was like a different person. Like the conversation was like clear and coherent. Their eye contact was good. Their hygiene was good. They were future oriented. They just bloomed. They would just bloom. And it was so cool to just be like, yay, like yay modern medicine for being able to, it's just such a game changer. If a person is struggling with mental illness and they can get on the right medication. So yeah, I'm glad that you realize that medication is so necessary for you. And I'm glad that your life is on the right path. And JJ says, yes, I was in denial for years about being depressed because it became my normal. Yeah. Mita says, my own parents and brother are narcissists. My life is ruined. I'm depressed. How do I go no contact with parents and my brother? I need healing. I'm from India. I'm jobless and sick due to torture and domestic violence. Are you still in India? I guess regardless of where you are, I think one of the ways that I would start with that would be to try to get a support system around you as much as possible. So whatever that might look like wherever you are. And I'm sure that there's cultural considerations that I'm not familiar with as far as in an Indian family, like how possible is that for you to go no contact? I mean, I guess, how is that handled in your culture? And what alternatives are there for you? Because I don't know. So, goes back, carving out peace as much as you possibly can in your life and in the ways that you possibly can. And if you have any type of like mental health services wherever you are, really utilizing them. There's lots, if you have the internet, which apparently you do because you're here, lots of different like online support groups that might be a consideration for depression, for abuse, for narcissistic families, for all kinds of things. Right? Vaughn says, it's nice to know that there are people out here in the world that are battling their demons and know that I'm not alone. I feel better about talking about it. Yes. Yes, I agree. And, it's amazing how many people, like everybody's got something, and like we all carry around so much of this stuff and it isn't talked about. And because of that, it can make us feel so alone. There was this YouTube creator, this channel that I came across the other day. She's so talented. The channel name is Swoop, SWOOP. And she is the kind of content video creator that is like it's a good use of YouTube. Like she's so talented and she does all of this editing and like, she's just really creative. Anyways, she, had a really big channel of like 600,000 subscribers. And then basically this glitch in the system, YouTube just kind of killed her channel. And it wasn't intentional. It was a fluke and YouTube didn't know how to fix it and she couldn't fix it. And so it was just all gone. And so she's having to rebuild. And she was talking about it and she's there's one video where she's like, I'm just going to film myself and all of my anxiety. And so she just starts filming like her anxiety attacks and like, she's on the phone with her mom and she's just losing it. And, this is her livelihood. And not to mention like all of just the pressure and the stress and just all of it. And it was so just heartwarming, and heart-wrenching to see everything that she was going through, because you would look at her and you just wouldn't guess it, like she just she hides it well. And it is nice when people share kind of that stuff that's going on with them. Mita says, the doctor says that my parents and brother need counseling and not I. It is my family members that have this personality disorder. They have sucked all of my energy and have crushed my soul. Well, here's the thing. This goes back to like what we have control over and what we don't have control over. And so if they truly, I mean, even if they're not personality disordered, if a person doesn't see that they have a problem, they're not going to get help for it. And so while there's kind of this saying out there that with narcissistic personality disorder, it's the only disorder where the person's left alone and it's everybody around them that's treated. And that's so spot on, because the abusive person, the narcissist, oftentimes doesn't think that they have a problem because they have this huge level of entitlement and this kind of lack of ability to introspect and to see themselves accurately. And so the result of that is they are so crazy making and controlling and exhausting and abusive to everybody around them, but they feel so entitled to act how they act that they don't see it as a problem. And so that's why the rest of us have to go to therapy. It's to learn how to handle this so we don't feel that our lives have been destroyed, that we are able to reassemble the pieces and rebuild and to move forward in our life and to get the support. Because if we've got this person in our life that's so incredibly destructive, then we've got to learn how to either detach from that or to cope with it or to process all of the pain from that. So that's why therapy for us is beneficial with coping skills and just sometimes even just venting and being validated for what you're going through. Susan asks, what advice do you give if one of your children doesn't want to leave an abusive relationship? That's such a tough one. There's a couple different things that you can potentially do, and it's really difficult because it's often really treading lightly. Because if your child is really heavily invested in this relationship working out, they quote unquote love this person, right? Or they have children with them, or they have a house together, or they're deeply connected to this person. They're going to have a really difficult time walking away from the relationship, and they're going to continue to minimize and justify the behavior. So if you're pointing out the problems with their partner, they can become very defensive and hostile, and it can very quickly, if you think about it, if any of us, if we're doing something that another person doesn't like, what tends to happen is then we start to hide from them what we're doing. So in terms of abusive relationships, it's common for a person, if friends or family aren't supportive of their relationship, they stop reaching out for help. They stop talking about what's going on. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that their partner is a jerk or that they should leave, or because they don't want to do that. They're not ready to leave. They just want to vent about things. So it can be helpful sometimes. So like one approach would be if your child is into YouTube videos, to give them a link to mention, or you can even just mention, hey, you know what you're describing sounds a lot like whatever it might be, projection, gaslighting, love bombing, whatever it might be. And, there's some YouTube videos on it if you're interested. So this way you're not pushy, you're not trying to control them. If you're interested, it might be worth looking up. And they might get really defensive. Well, you're not a therapist. You don't know. Da, 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 da. Just say, oh, yeah. I'm just saying, like, what I've discovered. And maybe you could just say, you know what, maybe I'm wrong. Like, but it might be worth looking up. And odds are once they start, like it's pulling a string on a sweater. because they're so lost in all of this confusion and the manipulation and all of it. But once they start getting clarity as to like, oh, okay, this, oh my gosh, yes, projection, this is it. And then one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. But if they're periodically coming to you and they're wanting to leave, but you can tell there's a lot of that back and forth, and maybe this person will change, and I can't stay, but I don't want to leave kind of thing, turning it back onto them and saying something like, you'll know when the time is right. You'll know when it's time for you to leave. Or telling, or maybe encouraging them, if now is not the time to leave, do you have a line in the sand for when it is? So if now is not a good time to leave, then when would be a good time to leave? Like, what would need to happen in order for you to leave? And you might even say, you know what, you don't even, this is just something that you need to that you could ask yourself. This isn't something that you need to answer to me for, but this is just some food for thought. So kind of getting clear, because as we all know, like, these things are a gradual thing. Nobody thinks that they're going to stay with a lying, cheating, stealing, verbally abusive, physically abusive person until it happens to them. And then they're left kind of scratching their head, wondering how they got there. And because that behavior tends to be, abusive behavior tends to be it's progressive, and it gets progressively worse over time. And because there's often other periods of calm, or like, because it's the cycle of abuse. So you have this idealized stage or the honeymoon stage where everything is fantastic and ideal. And then you have like the devalue stage where then the abuse starts up again. And then you have, well, if there's not the discard, if the partner's not leaving, or if they're not leaving, then it just continues between this idealized and devalue stage over and over and over and over again until finally somebody leaves. So because there are those periods of like, quote unquote, good behavior, it can be, and then peppered with like the abusive behavior, it can lead a person to think every time there's that good behavior, they can think, oh, we've really turned a corner. They've changed. And then boom, oh no, now it's more bad behavior, but generally it's even worse bad behavior. Or they were cheating one time, they thought everything was fine. Maybe it's even been years, and then boom, oh my gosh, no, they've actually got a profile on an online dating site, or maybe they've gotten somebody pregnant, or like there's multiple people that surface that they've been having affairs with. Like, it just tends to be, they find out more and more, but then the good times happen. They think things turn a corner, and then there's kind of this calm period for a while, and then boom, there's something else. So to outsiders, or even to a person in it, it's a very confusing thing. So yeah, I'm sorry. That's got to be really difficult to watch if it's your daughter, or if it's your child in general. There are support groups. There's free support groups out there. I have, depending on how controlling and like how kind of linked in the abusive person is, I have my website, thriveafterabuse.com. There's a support group there. There's also a support group I have on Facebook. It's a group. So make sure if anybody's interested in joining the group, because it's called Thrive After Abuse, but the page is also called Thrive After Abuse. The page is open, so anybody can see what you're posting on there. The group is closed. But if you've got a controlling, scary person in your life, even though they can't see what you're posting in the group, they can see that you're a member of the group. So if privacy is at all a concern, I highly recommend creating a fake Facebook profile and joining support groups that way. So that way you're not followed in, they're not having friends of theirs join. Like, there's nothing, you can breathe easy because you can create a fake name with fake pictures and the whole nine. So, okay, let's see here. Let me scroll up. Oh, absolutely. Jennifer's talking about kind of depression and overwhelm and says, yes, some days are way worse than others. Today, I had a therapy session early this morning and I broke down because it was so hard for me to simply go to the pharmacy to get medication for an infection. But after my session, I did it and it led me to do other things I needed to do, like call my front office about a maintenance problem. And then I did a lot of cleaning. Sometimes doing one productive thing snowballs into a lot of productivity. I absolutely agree. One of my biggest go-to things when I'm having trouble getting going is I set a timer for 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'll focus on one thing. So if my house, and for me, my external environment is very much a reflection of my internal environment. That's when it's weird. I struggle with knowing how I feel, but it's more of like visual clues that something's off. And it might be like what you're describing, Jennifer, like absolute just exhaustion where I just can't even do basic things. Or I'll notice my car is a mess or my room is a mess, my house is a mess. And then if I can set a timer for 10 or 15 minutes, and you can make it fun, you can put on a playlist, a music playlist or a podcast or a YouTube video or whatever, and hit it hard, go clean for 15 minutes and just power. It's amazing how much you can get done in 15 minutes. And then that you kind of get that dopamine hit from that completion of that task. And then that's why it starts snowballing, is you're starting to feel good about making progress. So doing little things like that can really make a huge difference. If you can't, like even exercise, if sometimes too, I think if we set really big goals, we're like, okay, I'm going to go, especially if you're feeling depressed, right? You're like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym 7 days this week. It's like, well, is that really realistic if you're struggling with even getting out of bed? And so maybe setting the timer for 5 minutes and seeing how many jumping jacks you can do or how many sit-ups you can do, just some sort of movement in like a positive direction makes a huge difference. Yes, I agree, Gareth. He says there is a saying, state of your house, state of your mind. Yeah, I think there's so much truth to that. So much truth. Travis and I were talking about that the other day, and I was like, it feels like, I mean, we've really been living in limbo since the house fire, and there's just boxes everywhere here. And I was saying, I'm like, man, my office, it's so quickly become my new normal. Let's see if I can turn this camera around without like really messing stuff up so you guys can see it. Hold on a second. I'll turn it around, maybe, if it'll work. I don't even know what all I have hanging up. No, I'll have to take pictures and do it. I don't think this is going to work. But I don't think I can do it without messing up my whole thing. But I have no shelving. That's my closet. Like, it's just, it's just, everything's a mess because there's no room. I have no shelving. I have no dresser. I have no, it's just a bunch of boxes. Actually, let me see. I'm going to try to turn it around. Hold on. Okay, that camera is going to be all messed up. Hold on a second. Yes, no, okay. Yeah, so like it's just boxes everywhere, and so it's just a stressful way to live, to be in limbo like this. And we were talking like, man, it's got to like negatively impact our mental health, but we're just so used to living like this. And Gosh. Yeah. So hopefully soon we'll be in a place and unpacked and situated. Malta says, thank you for the behind the scenes tour. Yeah, Jane says, good God, Dana. I know, right? There's no place to put anything. So, it is, I mean, it just is what it is. It is what it is. When I start getting overwhelmed with stuff, I just try to take some time and be grateful. Like, I mean, I really am like, I'm thankful and grateful that we have a roof over our head, that, that we're safe, that we survived, that, it's nice that this apartment is 2 rooms. We were in a hotel for what was it, like 2 or 3 weeks in the beginning. And it was just the 2 of us and 2 cats in a hotel room. So I work from home. I couldn't get anything done, hardly. And it was loud and that was difficult. So I don't know. There's a lot for us to still be thankful for, but it's been difficult. That's a really interesting point, Missouri Cowboy. He says, I've been fantasizing about tiny houses. And then I realized it's just another extreme. My goal is balance. I agree. I agree with you completely. I think it's total. I see these tiny houses and they're darling. They're absolutely darling. Don't get me wrong. But to me, they're just not practical. It's like living in a dollhouse, you know? I think you can live quite comfortably in, 500 to like 800 square feet where you're not having to, bend, you're not having to like squat down because, your bedrooms and all, you're not having to sleep on the floor of a loft and you can't even stand up straight up there. Like, or your closet is also like your kitchen pantry is also, like where it's too small. Like it's not that, I don't know, that would be intense. Oh, well, thank you, Mita. Yes, I really appreciate your kind words. Oh, I like that, Gareth. That is a good technique. He says, here's a good technique. Put, say, blue dots around your apartment on paper, obviously. And every time you look at one or see one, think of something positive. I love that. That is absolutely brilliant. I love that. Man, I really love that. I think I could go to like an office supply store because they have those dots, for like a garage sale that are colored. Like, I think they're like yellow or red, or maybe they might have blue or something like that, and put those around. I think that's, even if I wasn't in this apartment, I still really like that idea. I had something similar, but I like your take on it better, where when I was going through everything, the first time with Jack, well, like, I don't know, many years ago, 8 something years ago now, I had designated the color red as my grounding color, as a reminder that I mattered. And I had this real, I don't know if you were here during me telling you the story, but like, I had this realization. I got out of I was crying. I was in the shower and I was feeling so unloved. And I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I so unlovable? And I just was in so much pain. And it was just this realization of, I don't love me. Like, I need to love me. And I didn't even know what that meant. Like, I didn't know what it even really meant to like love yourself. I just thought it was like a weird, silly thing that people say. And, or I thought it meant, and I guess it kind of does in some cases, like it was synonymous with self-care. Like, okay, loving yourself means like getting a manicure or getting a massage or, uh, you know, just like liking what you see in the mirror, like these kinds of things. And so I just didn't fully get like the whole concept. And so I kind of went on this crusade of like, I want to figure out what it means to actually really love myself. And so I designated the color red. And then I think one of the first things I bought was a bunch of red towels. And so I'd get out of the shower and I would wrap myself in a red towel. And it was like giving myself a hug of like, Dana, you know what? Nobody else might love you, but I love you. Like you matter. There's a lot of stuff that's right about you. And reminding myself of that, it was probably one of the things that really helped to save my life because I was at such a low point. And so I began telling other people about, because people were like, what are you doing? Because I was buying like all of these red things because I wanted that visual reminder of to take time and to signal. It was, just these little winks to yourself of like, hey, you know what, you matter. And so then friends of mine began buying little red things like, hey, I thought of you. And of course that means like to me like 1,000 times more if somebody would send me like a little, whatever, like a little red pencil sharpener or what have you. It was just this feeling of like, we love you too. Oh, it's gonna make me start crying. Like, we love you too, and just seeing that, it was powerful. But I like your dot thing because you can do that anywhere. You can put that in your car, you can do it in your house. And I love that. That might be a good exercise for us to all do. Okay, I think that's such a great idea. Aqua Sun says, how do you do your best to not become a narcissist if your parents are narcissists? Well, I think that's a good question. A lot of it's going to involve unlearning a lot of most likely what you learned as a child about who you are and how to relate effectively to yourself and to the outside world, and boundaries and standards and deal breakers, and learning about assertive communication. And there's a lot to kind of learn there, but it's basically like learning how to be a healthy, functional person. And the fact that you're even interested and driven to do something different speaks volumes. And I think that'll help a lot. So I would say a good book to start with potentially. I think boundaries is a really big part. I think that's one of the most problematic things with narcissism is there's no concept of boundaries. They don't have their PMLity calls it like your internal boundaries. So there's no they don't have internal boundaries, and they don't have really external boundaries either. And so developing a really healthy understanding of boundaries is going to be huge. PMLity's book, depending on kind of where you are in healing and understanding, it's one of my favorites. I think she just really nails the concept of boundaries. She just nails it, unlike anybody that I've ever come across. So her book, Facing Codependence, even if you don't identify as being codependent, it's fantastic. And I still need to get my book club notes up. I just realized that. So next week, let me make a note to myself to finish up those notes and post them. And then I'll post a link in the chat or somewhere for next week. So, understanding boundaries, that book really spells it out. Learning, and I would say learning to really love yourself is just a huge thing. Like understanding what that means, like loving, treating your space, your everything with your time, your energy with value is huge. It's so much easier to love other people when we love ourselves. Because if we don't love ourselves, and if we struggle with really low self-esteem, then it's really hard for us to be like truly authentic in any relationship that we're in. Because if we lack self-esteem, then we're always struggling or fearful that the other person's going to leave, or that they might leave if they really knew who we were, or we just continually feel less than. So working on building a healthy self-esteem is an important part of that too. Okay, let's see. Let me scroll up here. Shauna says, has anyone noticed a connection between suicide and narcissistic abuse? Suicide being the number 2 leading cause of death overall in the United States. I have heard of so many people committing suicide that are the times of narcissistic abuse. Well, I think, okay. I mean, it makes total sense to me because that level of emotional destruction that narcissists cause can totally drive a person to suicide. Even if they're not a full-out narcissist, like hateful words spoken to other people can have a really negative, long-lasting impact on them. And, if a person's already kind of in a fragile state, yeah, it can easily push them into suicide. So, and I think a lot of this stuff, it's just not understood for even what it is. I would say, I mean, this is the case with women, but I feel like it's especially the case with men, because identifying abuse in general is so difficult, because we all have this idea of like what abuse is, right? And generally, it's a kind of a big, scary or mean-looking guy who is physically abusive to a woman, and that they're in a significant partner kind of relationship, like they're married or they're dating or what have you, right? But if what we're experiencing doesn't fit that stereotype, then it's hard for people to understand or identify with this is actually abuse. And like I was saying, I think men, especially here, I don't know how, probably even worse in other countries, but here it's very much like, they're really not, their emotions are not given, men are taught, you don't cry, you suck it up, basically don't feel, and you just deal with stuff. And so men at a really young age are very out of touch with how they feel about things. And there's many downsides to that, but a main one being like, if a person's separated from their emotions, it's really difficult for them to make solid decisions. Because if you're only making solid decisions, or if you're only making decisions based out of kind of expectation or obligation, and you're not paying attention, if you're not in tune with your emotional self to know like what nourishes you and what drains you, then you're really rudderless. You're really lost at sea. And it's really difficult to tell, like, is this what I want to study in college? Is this the kind of person that I want to date? Is this the kind of, like, you just don't know yourself because you're out of tune with how your body is signaling to you that you're stressed or depressed or excited or any of that. So, then, obviously there's a lot of men out there that go through, being abused, being molested, being, growing up with a controlling mother or father or any of these things. And we're getting there, but it's not really socially acceptable for them to reach out and to ask for help, or even to talk to their friends, guy friends, about stuff like this. Like, it's just, not discussed. And so I think the suicide rate from men is significantly higher than for women. And my guess would be that would be why, because this stuff is just not talked about. And if a person is so separated from their emotions, and if they're taught to just suck it up, then what do? Right? It just keeps piling on. And they're so out of tune with that, their life is so painful, and they don't know how to cope with that pain or how to stop the pain, then I can see where it's like, well, then I guess the option is suicide. And that's tragic, is what that is. So the whole conversation around mental health and just processing pain and trauma is, it's hopefully things will really, really change in the next handful of years here, because it's a problem, and it's one that can be handled if that conversation's opened up about that. JJ says, yes, it's so true, Dana. That has been an issue for me. I hear this all the time. Kevin was saying, I was never allowed to be angry as a child. That was a huge mistake on my parents' part, long term. Yes. And that makes sense. Rob says, men tend to follow through with suicide statistically, and women are more inclined to attempt it. Yes. And Missouri Cowboy says, I'm so thankful for all the gifts of recovery made possible by the information, insights, and experiences shared by you all. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, it's just so much of it's just realizing like you're not alone, and the way that you feel isn't so much of the feelings that we all have. It's just part of the human experience, especially if the human experience involves abuse. And there's so much healing that can happen from just talking about what's going on. Yeah, Gareth is saying Japan has a really high suicide rate. Yeah, I can only imagine, the pressure to perform and to achieve. And it's just heartbreak. It's just so heartbreaking, the stuff that we do to each other, And Sam was saying, yeah, guys tend to get twice or triple shamed if they're going through that kind of abusive relationship. And that's what I've heard so many times, like, suck it up, man. Yeah, I think it makes people uncomfortable. A lot of people uncomfortable, male or female, when people start opening up about stuff in their life. Like, this is where it goes back to, it's really important to kind of know who is emotionally safe, because I have female people in my life that are really uncomfortable with the discussion of anything of depth. It's that, like, I have family members that are this way. And I remember being a kid, or maybe like a teenager, I guess, when I was really becoming very vocal about, I don't know, like just wanting to know certain things and wanting to discuss things and like wanting to find out information. And my family is like, they really just shut a lot of that stuff down. Like, it's crazy to me how little I know about my family. And they just don't talk at all about anything. It's just all really surface level stuff. And they don't talk about emotions. This stuff is it's just not discussed. And so and that's between like woman to woman. So forget about it. Like, if a guy had an issue, like, it was just totally invalidated. And that's just wild. Okay, let's see here. Let me scroll up. I agree. Vaughn says, some people feel like suicide is the only reason to escape, but it's not, in my opinion. Yeah, I agree. I think that those feelings, that depression is such, it's just such a monster, and it can really get its hooks in a person, and it's amazing. It's just that sense of hopelessness and like futility of like, it doesn't even matter. It can be so all consuming, and it can be really difficult for a person to kind of keep their head above water and just to realize, like, I won't always feel this way. Like, there are things that I have control over. There's things that I can do. I can You know, there's things that I can work towards building up a good life in like certain ways. Um, there's things that you can do, and finding a sense of peace and finding joy is possible. Yeah, I agree. Ali says, I think men that show emotion is a strength, not a weakness. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, Lauren says, Dana, I liked what you'd said about suicide. The pain just gets transferred, usually to a person you never intended to hurt. Yeah, it was a saying, something like, suicide doesn't stop the pain, it just gives it to someone else. And I think that's just so spot on, because that's exactly what happens. And it gives it to a lot of other people, not just one or two, a lot. And it's just devastating. Okay, let me scroll up here. And that's a really great point, Shauna. She says, men that I know who have been in relationships with a narcissist don't want to call it abuse. I would also say that women who have anybody that's been in a relationship with a narcissist, if it's not extreme physical abuse, they have a really hard time calling it abuse. And I get it, because it kind of feels like, well, but I don't want to take away from the people that have quote unquote really been abused, right? Like, okay, maybe I was yelled at and it was emotional abuse and psychological abuse, but it wasn't like I was being beaten. That's one of the ways that I think in the abuse community that people tend to invalidate themselves and unintentionally invalidate other people before they're aware of the magnitude and the severity of emotional and psychological abuse. And I think, again, men especially, because society is like, oh, come on, guy, you're I don't know, 5'11", and she's 5'3". Like, you couldn't fight her off, you couldn't leave, like, oh, give me a break. But abuse is not about gender and strength, it's about power and control. And that's a big shift that we need to make as a society, is to see the problematic behavior for what it is, and to not see it in terms of just gender or size difference. Like, it's the behavior, and it's out there. And I think that what kind of circling back to what we were talking about earlier in the live stream about why the percentage is so low, I think a lot of the stuff flies under the radar, especially if the woman is being abusive. Like, I think it's women that are abusive. Tends to not even really be addressed, even if she's physically abusive. It's kind of the mindset of like, well, what did he do to deserve it? Right. So there's this huge kind of stereotype or like misunderstanding about how abuse happens and who can be the target of abuse. Okay, let's see here. Okay, I must have missed part of that. JJ says, Dana, please tell Mita about the dangers of using the term narcissist with professional psychologists why to just say victim of abuse and not accusing someone of being a narcissist. Okay, and this goes for everybody too. When you go to see a mental health professional, we use the term like narcissistic abuse, or we use the term like narcissists or sociopaths and stuff like this. Sometimes online, it's one of the ways that people are defining kind of their experience based on this behavior. And mental health professionals in general tend to really frown upon that, because it's seen as, well, one, that they like to be the one that makes the diagnosis. And then two, they don't know if it's accurate, right? And then three, it can really seem as like we're pathologizing this other person. So it's and kind of like weaponizing, I guess, like weaponizing the terminology of like, oh, that person's such a narcissist, and that we're trying to just tear them down, I guess is what I'm saying. So it can have, so a lot of people think like, okay, the more terminology I have as far as like different personality disorders and all this, the more I'll be able to share the same language with the mental health professional. And the more clarity that we can have, the more we can be on the same page. But using this kind of terminology tends to have the exact opposite effect. And there's a lot of mental health professionals that get upset by that, or that'll kind of shut down the conversation, or like want to argue with people about it, and and it might even be in a very like well-intended way, but kind of saying like, oh, well, narcissist, that word's just thrown around a lot, and so they're invalidating the person even though they don't mean to. So it can really open up a whole can of worms, and it's a lot. You're going to get a lot further, I would say, in therapy or with any mental health professional if you can talk about what you're experiencing in terms of behavior. And because here's the other thing too, because sometimes even if they're totally open to you using the words, they might have their own idea of what a narcissist is, or what a sociopath is, or what a relationship with one is. So if you're talking to them about it, they might start making all kinds of assumptions of, oh, then that must have meant that they were incredibly verbally abusive, or that they cheated on you all the time, or that they hit you. And none of that might have been the case. Like your experience might have been radically different from that. So if you speak to behavior, then it leaves less confusion about what you're experiencing. So talking about it in terms of, my mother was very verbally abusive, or my ex-partner was emotionally and psychologically abusive or manipulative, or talking about it, even if you want to say the behavior was really narcissistic or very self-absorbed, or they lacked empathy, they lacked remorse, a cruel level of indifference. These are, some ways that you can kind of word to describe, like what is going on. So just some thoughts. And Kit Kat says, my therapist told me that my ex was a narcissist and possibly a psychopath based on the sessions with myself and the kids. I'd never even heard the words until all of this fell apart. And that's normally how that'll go. So like if a person comes in to therapy and they're describing this behavior, like, oh my goodness, there's this, we keep going around this mountain over and over again, like this cruel lack of indifference. They don't seem to care about their children. They're so sadistic. They're so hurtful. They're so malicious. They're so immature. They're so irresponsible. They're so impulsive. They're so, you know what I mean? Like you're describing all of this. And so for a mental health clinician, they're going to start putting together the pieces, and they're basically looking at like, okay, this person that they're describing, here they've got this person in front of them who's, an anxious, unhinged, depressed wreck, trying to put together the pieces of why on earth is this other person so problematic? Like, why don't they not operate according to like the rules of society, like the rest of us? Like, why do they keep lying and cheating and stealing and manipulating and doing all of this stuff? And so, the mental health, generally they'll put that together. Whether or not they'll actually kind of use that terminology is another story. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But at the end of the day, it's the behavior. It truly is the behavior that's important. If it's pervasive and persistent problematic behavior, if all of your best attempts at communication and being assertive and having boundaries continue to backfire, then that's a problem. By whatever name you want to call it, that's a problem. So. Let's see here. Let me scroll up. Jeffrey, and I don't know if this is in response to what I'm saying or just as a comment, says the professional should be knowledgeable and competent. The ones we go to for help and call experts should actually be experts. Yeah, I think there's a lot of there's just the difference between theory and application, right? It's one thing to understand something. It's like, you can read a book on how to fix a car, right? Or how to run a marathon. That's probably a better example, how to run a marathon. Like reading a book on how to run a marathon and actually running a marathon are two very different things. Understanding, going through courses and understanding narcissists or sociopath or antisocials and actually being on the receiving end of it are two very different things. And trying to, and I think even then, like how it's understood is like, okay, these are kind of the child molesters and the rapists and the pervasive, persistent, problematic behavior. Like these are the people that have this ongoing problematic behavior of the world. But it's not just that. Like it's not just as extreme as that. There's a lot of them out there, and it is a problem. Like the guy I was talking about earlier, Robert Hare, who's a psychiatrist, he does trainings on working with mental health clinicians on identifying psychopaths and really doing a lot of training of like, this is how they operate. And it's not how you think how they operate. Like they don't all look like Charles Manson. They don't all look like, what's his name? Ted Bundy, or they have kind of like the wild eyes and like the intense stare. And there's kind of all of this, kind of called like mythos culture, like surrounding psychopaths and how they look and how they act. And some of them don't all act a certain way. That's the thing. So like, I don't know, I'm not even going to get into it, but like, it's frustrating when I hear from people who are like, well, this person's a psychopath and they said X, Y, and Z. And it's like, that to me is ridiculous because, okay, that's according to them. Like there's some things that are universal, like with people that are codependent, for example, right? Like there's some things that tend to be like repeating things. Like boundaries tend to be a pretty pervasive issue. Like there's certain themes that need to be addressed. And so there might be certain themes with like psychopaths or sociopaths, but they all operate totally differently, just like all alcoholics are totally different, even though they might all kind of lie or minimize how much they're drinking or, there's some things that like are common denominators, but there's still like wild amounts of variability between them because they're still people at the end of the day and they're all different. Allie says, what if a person does physically, mentally, verbally, and sexual abuse on top of homicidal? I mean, any type of like extreme behavior like that would fall under the category, any one of those really would fall under, if it's pervasive, persistent, problematic behavior, there's a disregard for like rules and norms. And there's kind of this behavior that's driven by manipulation, like dominance and deceit, that falls under the category of antisocial personality disorder. So this person, they just don't attach effectively to other people. They just don't care. They're just out there to get theirs. You're not dealing with like a team-oriented person that's ever going to have like effectively connect to other people and to care. You have to effectively attach to other people in order to care about them, at least to some degree. Sherry says, do you think antisocial personality disorder is a very severe narcissistic personality disorder? Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, yeah. I guess it's kind of how you look at, like, there's certain things that are different. Um, both. I mean, there's subtle differences, but the core of antisocial personality, like all antisocial personality disorder people, are narcissists at the core. So there's in narcissists, not in terms of like grandiosity or like even, well, I guess that would be arrogance, but the grandiosity is the part that tends to be missing. It's more of like narcissists, like antisocial, tend to be charming. Narcissists, not so much. Antisocial tend to be kind of a reckless disregard for like rules and norms. Narcissists may or may not be that way. Like narcissists, just it tends to be just all about them all of the time. And the more like overt, like textbook kind of ones, they're exhausting. I know politically, like people aren't going to want to get into it, but I mean, Donald Trump, like that's textbook. Textbook. You couldn't write a character that has more narcissistic behavior. And I'm not even saying politically, like I've voted both ways. So it's not that I'm trying to slam Republicans or anything like that. I'm saying, and I'm not alone in that, right? There's been books written by other mental health professionals that are like, this is a problem. So it's like that kind of stuff. So they come across in different ways, but both of it's a problem, but it might be just in different ways. And there might be other kind of subtle differences. Like that's really kind of a surface level thing that I'm talking about. I mean, you can get into all kinds of like attachment theory, and you can get into, I mean, you can go way far down that rabbit hole and like really split hairs, but it's, it's really selfish behavior taken to extremes. And I like to think of it as, narcissists have a mindset, it's all about me it's all about them. Like it's all about me kind of a mentality. Whereas sociopaths they'll pretend it's all about you in order to get their way because they're very exploitative. Narcissists might not be necessarily like exploitative like that. Like they're driven to get their way, but they might still get their way within the confines of like laws and rules and society to a point. But I don't know. As to me, it's shades of the same color. Um, okay, so with that said, uh, I'm sorry if I stirred up a pot. That was not my intention. I think the bigger point here, I think the biggest takeaway from all of that is it's really interesting, right? To try to figure out like, okay, well, what kind of person am I dealing with? Like, is this person like a narcissist or a sociopath or a psychopath? Or maybe this is like is this borderline personality disorder? Like, what is this? What's most important in all of that is for us to be able to identify like what is problematic behavior and to really start setting boundaries around it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if a person's a psychopath or if they have borderline personality disorder or if they have no personality disorder or if they're codependent or it doesn't matter. What matters is if something strikes you as a problem, then it's up to you to start responding to that kind of stuff appropriately in a way that you're able to not have it negatively impact your life, if that makes any sense. So, okay. 100 Smiles asked, well, then how do you get safe? Boundaries and distance. So it's you setting the pace. So if and it's difficult, like if you're married to if you have one as a family member, if you have a toxic person as a family member, it can be difficult to start getting distance. But this is where it helps to start brainstorming these things ahead of time. So like let's say, for example, normally for the holidays, you go over there for 2 weeks and you're miserable for 2 weeks, then okay, something needs to change. So maybe that's going over there for like 3 days. Maybe that's staying in a hotel. Maybe that's not going over there at all and like sending gifts. Maybe do you see what I'm saying? Like you start doing things different and realizing that not everybody's going to be okay with it, but like trying to navigate, like, what is it going to take for you to get some peace in your life and to balance that with, because there are like potentially cultural expectations at play or family expectations at play. Like I get that it's not so easy to just go no contact or just not see a person or to only spend, 3 hours there when for the past 40 years you've been going over there for 2 weeks. Like I know it's difficult to change things up. So you'll have to kind of figure out what can you do kind of within the parameters that you're working within. And then as you continue to start gaining ground back, keep going with that. So once people get used to, okay, you're not going to go over there for 2 weeks, that you're going to go over there for 10 days. And then you start kind of slowly moving it back into where it's starting to work for you more, or just whatever that might look like to you. Lauren says, should I consider moving to a climate I don't like to get away from abuse? I love where I live so much, but I can't really enjoy it because of the abuse. Well, I guess, thank you, Malta, for the live stream donation. She says, thank you for tonight's session. You are so welcome. Back to real quick what you were saying, Lauren. I guess first off, why would it mean that you'd have to move to a climate you don't like? Like if you're moving, right? Like couldn't you just move to a climate that you did like? So I don't know. That's a tough call. I mean, it might be worth going on. I don't know how far away you're thinking about moving, but it might be worth going on a road trip if it's within driving distance. Or, getting on a plane and renting a car and kind of tooling around for a week to kind of see like, okay, would I want to live here and exploring some new places? But I would never encourage anybody to move to a place that they don't like. So there's lots of places out there that you could potentially move to that you like even more than where you're living. Lauren says, well, because I need to get far away. Yes, but there's lots of places that you might like that are far away. Like, I don't think it has to be an either or thing. I don't think it needs to be like, it has to be a place I don't like and it's far away. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you could move to Costa Rica. You could move to Hawaii. I don't know what kind of climate you're looking for. You could move to California. You could move to Brazil. You could move to, I don't know. There's lots of places out there that you could consider moving to. I don't know. Maybe an exercise that you could do would be to write down, to start writing down places that you think, if you had a magic wand, where would you want to live and why? And start making a list of things that would be important for you, of things that you would want in a place that you would live. It's amazing when you start really getting clear on like what you do want. The possibility, your brain is just working on ways to like make that happen. It's weird how that happens, but it's true. So the more clarity you get of like, yes, I really want a place that has, pretty good, significantly good, a temperate climate. I really want a climate that's really nice year round. I really want a place that maybe has a very laid back way of life, that there's not a lot of traffic, that there's, you know, some, maybe that would be great for whatever field that you work in, that might have a decent airport nearby. So if you wanted to travel or whatever, you could. Reasonable cost of living, like getting clear. If you're, I don't know, if you're really into whatever hobby, right? Like if you're really into mountain biking or yoga or scuba diving, that it would might have those things, or writing, that you could find a writers group. You could start checking it out. You can go on to meetup.com and check into like different cities and see kind of what are the activities going on in those cities. And is this something that you could potentially check out? And if you do have the money, and frankly, I would say, and I'm not a big fan of people going into debt, but I think sometimes if you're really thinking about a major life move like this, it's worth the money, with tax refund, with even if you can pay it back quickly with credit card, putting it on a credit card, paying it back, but taking time to go out on a road trip to each area. Because like we were talking about earlier, everything is easy to get into and it's a lot harder to get out of. And if you have clarity on like the different criteria for what is the right, what creates like a nourishing environment for you, it's a lot easier to go explore that. I know it can, if you know, funds are tight, it can be inconvenient to fly out there, get a hotel, do all this, but it's much better to explore different areas that you think you might like than to move out there and then realize, oh my gosh, this is not at all what I thought it would be. So I really feel it's important to get out there, get on the ground, and to explore. So. And then just a reminder for some of the new people that are on, you know, there are support groups out there for narcissistic abuse. There's many free groups out there. I've got one on my website, thriveafterabuse.com. You can find my support group on Facebook at Thrive After Abuse. Just make sure that you join the group and not the Facebook page. If you're interested, you can do a search on the internet for narcissistic abuse support groups. Like I said, there's a lot out there. I always encourage people to join a handful so you can kind of see which groups resonate with you the best, and to kind of go from there. But the cool thing with online groups is they run 24 hours a day. So it's a great way to get support and validation. And also too, not even with just narcissistic abuse groups, but it can be a great way to get back out there in a reasonably comfortable way. So for all kinds of other groups, if you're struggling with depression, it might be a good group to join. Again, there's tons of these on Facebook. Or if you're really interested in, I don't know, scrapbooking or scuba diving, or I don't know, I mean, anything, there's groups out there. And I would also encourage people to support groups are great, but I think it really is important to balance that with something that nourishes you. Not just supports you, but nourishes you. So something that's positive, that's enjoyable, that brings a sense of like peace and joy and excitement and positivity into your life. So I know that you might not feel like it right now, but I think it is something, it's an important direction to kind of start moving into. Like, don't wait to heal, I guess is what I'm saying, in order to start living your life and moving forward in all that. It's healing. It helps you heal the more you can start kind of getting out there and reconnecting with things that you enjoy. Okay, so with all that said, let's do our meditation, and we will call it a night. So if you want to take some time and find a comfortable spot, either seated or laying down, whatever's the most comfortable for you. Taking some time to do some deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. With each breath in, allowing that breath to go deep down into the base of your lungs, down into your stomach, feeling your chest rise and fall with each breath. Being fully present in this moment and in your body. Turning your attention inward till you can feel your heartbeat. Perhaps taking some time to give gratitude for all of the amazing things that your body does every single moment of every single day, without us having to think about it or anything. Just what an amazing gift the human body really is. And continuing to breathe. Being fully present in this moment. And for our time together, focusing on releasing any anxiety about the future, releasing any regret or sadness about the past, being fully present here in the moment. And continuing to breathe. And bringing your attention to the top of your forehead. Relaxing all of the muscles in and around your forehead and your eyes. Feeling all of that stress and anxiety just melt away. Relaxing your cheeks and your jaw. Unclenching your teeth and allowing your tongue to fall from the roof of your mouth. And letting your jaw fall open. And continuing to breathe. Relaxing your neck, your shoulders, allowing your shoulders to fall back as your chest opens up. Relaxing your arms, your hands, and your fingers. Allowing your arms and your hands to fall into whatever position is the most comfortable. And continuing to breathe. Relaxing your stomach, releasing any knots or tightness or that clenching sensation that you might experience. Just relaxing your stomach and noticing that when you do so, that each breath in is able to travel so much further down, 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 deep into your torso. Relaxing your hips. Relaxing your legs. Allowing them to fall into whatever position is the most comfortable. Relaxing your feet and your toes. Allowing your feet to fall into whatever position is the most comfortable. Continuing to breathe. Now taking a few moments and doing a quick scan of your body to notice if there's any areas that you might be holding on to stress or tension. And sending the next few breaths to those areas, allowing that oxygen to loosen up those muscles. And for that stress and anxiety to just easily and effortlessly just dissipate. Now let's visualize a beautiful waterfall, clean and sparkling, silver, perhaps hints of turquoise blue, shimmering, beautiful, cleansing. And let's visualize any remaining stress or anxiety or depression that we might be feeling as weights in a backpack. And for now, we're going to just take that backpack off and set it down in a safe place where we can come pick it back up later if we so choose. And us taking that backpack off doesn't mean that we're okay with what happened to us. It doesn't mean that we're forgetting or anything like that. It just means that we can choose to pick it up and put it down, and that it's okay. So for right now, we're just going to choose to put it down. Noticing how much lighter your body feels with that weight off. So now as we move forward into this waterfall, allowing that water to easily and effortlessly just cleanse away any negativity, self-doubt, anxiety, pain, or stress. Easily and effortlessly just washing it away, feeling how clean and light and refreshed you are as you walk through that waterfall. Now take maybe perhaps sitting down or going into a little wading pool that's off to the side of the waterfall. And sitting in that pool, perhaps it's nice warm water in there, like a little hidden hot spring. Sitting in there, taking some time for reflection, just acknowledging how far you've come, and that just realizing that there is so much that is right about you, that there really truly is. There is still so much to be grateful for in this life. That there are so many things that are good and right about you. That you are a warrior and that you've been through a lot and you're still going. Connecting with that inner strength and taking time to just appreciate how much you've gone through and to acknowledge that resilience that you have and that strength that you have. It's powerful. And perhaps taking a moment to just kind of wrap your arms around yourself in a comforting embrace. Just a little hug, acknowledging, you know what, you've gone through a lot and you're doing such a good job. You really are. You're doing such a good job. You're learning so many new things about self-care and how to be self-protective and to value your time and your energy and your emotions. And that you're going to get through this and you are going to be stronger in the end. You are resilient. You are powerful. You are a warrior. And that there is so much that is right about you. And when you're ready, come on back and open your eyes. Thank you, Missouri Cowboy, for the live stream donation. I appreciate it. So thank you guys so much for joining me. And I hope to see you back next week, Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So take care. I think you can still stay on the chat if you'd like. I think that chat keeps going even after I get off the air. So I hope to see you then. As always, lots of love to you guys. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care and just lots of love to you. Okay? Good night.